Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. I've got a video right here about all the things that I think are extremely important for MLB The Show and SDS to fix for MLB The Show 2020 and beyond. Now, it is January, so I'm not sure how much of this can actually be implemented into the game in the next 2 months before it comes out. Likely very little, but there are a lot of things here that I'd like to talk about before we get into the beta that comes out in a couple weeks from now. That way we can keep an eye on certain things that may have been changed from this year to next. And a lot of the things that I think that are important here, I want to make sure that if they haven't been addressed, we can bring it up with SDS, either with the beta or sometime afterwards for the years after. Now, what I'm going to do in this video is show a few different parts of gameplay. Most of this is going to be about hitting. Some of it's going to be about pitching, very little. And the way we're going to talk about things is I will address certain things that occur in this game. I will give some specific feedback and solutions that, again, may not be able to be implemented soon. It might not be SDS's approach to the game, especially since they are considered a simulation baseball game. And then we're also going to talk about some concepts that may not have an exact solution, kind of change the way that the game is thought about, but again, not necessarily anything concrete for anyone to act on. So let's go ahead and talk about some things that I think are imperfections of this game, and that can have specific solutions. Number one, and a good example of this is Ken Griffey Jr., are the deep green zones that we see on the swing feedbacks. Now, if you watch my pitching tips video that just came out right before this one, I talked about deep greens and the fact that sometimes when the ball is on the inside half, as you'll see in the feedback right here, I'm going to get a green zone that's very close to the front of the plate. Now, most hitters would have seen that green zone way out in front of the plate, probably about 6 or 7 inches in front of the plate. Griffey and guys like Frank Thomas have these deep green zones no matter where the ball is, whether the ball's on the inside or outside half of the plate. The green zone shows up pretty much right along the front, and for a lot of hitters even slightly behind the front of the plate. And this might not seem like much, but when you go into the instant replay and you look at the point of contact with the baseball and you see the direction of the baseball off the bat, you realize that a lot of times when you're pulling the baseball, this is not the case for when you hit the ball up the middle the other way with these guys, but when you pull the baseball with these guys, the physics on the ball does not make sense. A lot of times the ball is coming directly, you make contact with the ball parallel to the front of the plate, and the ball pretty much should go somewhere up the middle, maybe towards one of the gaps. But a lot of times you're going to see the ball end up going down the line on the pull side. Now, like I said, this is not very realistic. I think what they're trying to accomplish here is they're trying to say that Griffey is a whole field hitter, and that's the reason why the ball goes in an odd direction. And as you can see right there, obviously I didn't square up that ball very well, but the ball made contact with the bat behind the plate, and the bat was actually directed towards the left side, and somehow it went directly up the middle. So there's a little bit of strange feedback with some of these contact points, and it's not just the deep greens, but it is a little bit odd. And the reason why I find this really frustrating sometimes is that you face certain hitters that can't catch up to fastballs with most of their hitters, but all of a sudden you throw a guy with a deep green zone in there. And because the green zone is farther back than others, that means they have a little bit more time to react and swing at the ball. And if they make contact on the inside part of the plate, on a pitch that would have been late on other hitters, they actually make good contact, and I think it rewards bad hitters. That's what I'm trying to get at here, is that I think that the deep green rewards guys that can't swing the bat as quickly. It is something that you can adjust to, and that's kind of what I did with guys like Frank Thomas, but I don't think it has a place in the game. Now, something else that we talked about in the pitching tips video is the adjustment of the green zone when the ball is on the inside and outside half of the plate. SDS might have a good reason for doing the green zones that we just talked about a second ago, but this I think needs a major improvement right here. Griffey is not a good example, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a clip from yesterday's video and I'm going to place it right into this one because it's exactly what I'm talking about. And basically, if the ball is anywhere to the inside part of the plate, the green zone shows up way out in front, and if it's anywhere left of the plate, even just slightly to the left, just right there, it's going to show up as well behind the plate for most hitters. Again, Griffey's not a good example, but I'll show you with Abreu in that clip. We're going to go ahead and test this theory with Abreu. So if we get an inside pitch, the green zone should show up out in front of the plate. And there you go. Most of the green zone there is out in front of the plate. And if we get a pitch on the outside half, let's see if we can get a green zone that shows up behind the plate. All right, so this ball was a little bit dead center, and it turns out that if the ball is anywhere left of center, see, most of the green zone showed out in front of the plate. If we got that ball an inch to the right, we would have had a different situation. So let's see if it shows up here. That ball was just a little bit right of center, and let's see where the green zone shows up. So there you can see that's a perfect example where most of the green zone, actually the entire green zone, was well behind the plate. And we're going to try it again right here. Let's see where the green zone shows up. And it makes sense. This is a good thing to have as part of the hitting engine. As you can see, way behind the plate, that green zone right there. So that's a good thing to have in the hitting engine when it comes to the outside and inside parts of the plate. The problem is in this game, there are only 2 blocks where if it's anywhere left of center, the green zone shows out in front, and anywhere right of center, it shows out behind. And there should be another one in the middle, kind of in between those 2. So hopefully that changed that for next year. But what I wanted to bring up there is that when you throw a pitch inside to someone and they're late on it, if you throw the exact same pitch slightly on the outside half with the exact same timing for that hitter, they will get it in the green zone. So just keep an eye out for that. And I think there should be another third distance for that green zone right over the middle of the plate for most hitters, because there's a significant change between 1 inch of the plate, and that's just not very good. It's not realistic, first of all, and it results in some really weird contact on almost identical swings and almost identical pitches. Now, one of the other reasons why I'm playing Challenge of the Week right here is to see if I can find one of these weak liners, because I think that's one of the reasons why we get so many lineouts. And that's one of the biggest things that people talk about in this game is the lineouts and the frequency that they happen. Obviously, they happen in real life, but the frequency that they happen in this game tends to make better players lose to lesser players, or the person who was playing the best in a game may lose more often than they should, and definitely more than they would in real life. So what I'm trying to get here is a weak liner feedback, because sometimes you can get a line drive that clears the infield by a good few feet, and it's called a weak line drive. It can be hit 100 miles an hour and it'll still be called weak. And what I want to know is if that kind of feedback plays into the randomness. We all know that there's some randomness in the PCI and in hitting in this game. And I want to know if the weak liner feedback is built into the hitting engine at all times, which means if you square up a baseball, you can never get that kind of feedback, right? Because in the engine, if you're getting a good squared up, you're never going to get a weak result, right? But that weak result is actually a good swing. It's actually a base hit in most situations. So what I'm thinking is there's a section of hits in the engine when it's picking out what kind of hit you're about to get. I think there's a section of hits that just doesn't appear. So a lot of your base hits that should show up just behind the infield are actually considered weak. So that might be another reason why bloop hits happen so much, because those weak hits are actually good swings, at least in terms of the output. So the game registers it as a bad swing, a weak late or something like that. But one of those selections in the weak late category is something that actually results in a lot of base hits. So I think SDS needs to go back and reevaluate what kind of hits go where. And again, I don't know if this is the case for all game modes or if it just happens to be the feedback for Challenge of the Week. I doubt that. So we're going to see if that plays a part in line drives for next year. I do remember looking at really high exit velos on MLB StatCast at one point, and I remember seeing the feedback for a Bryce Harper swing where he hit a line drive past the infield, past first base, and it was actually considered a ground ball. So it could be that SDS is using spray charts that MLB gives them, and they could just be going off of real life, and it might not be their fault. So we'll see if they reevaluate that. We'll see if MLB reevaluates that. It could just be them going off of what MLB considers a certain type of swing. Now, another difference between 18 and 19 when it comes to line drives is that, first of all, I don't know if you guys remember how many line drives there were last year, but there were plenty of lineouts. One of the main things is that contact hitters were not usable, and SDS told us that the reason why they weren't usable last year is because they didn't have enough power in the engine, and they increased the power on the back end for us coming into 19. Contact hitters are much more viable this year, but I think the main thing that they changed between last year and this year is that last year, the natural good squared up swing was a higher launch angle. So that means two things. Number one, we know that last year there were way more home runs on good squared up. If you guys did a lot of grinding on the rookie difficulty last year, you know that it was really easy to hit home runs. And it's not quite the same in moments this year on rookie. It's a little bit tougher. It's a lot of lineouts, a lot of line drives when you square up the baseball. So what I think they did is they took the average launch angle on a good squared up swing and they brought it down, which makes sense. I think that's okay. But I think that was the unintended consequence, is that we resulted in having way more lineouts, because last year a good squared up would be a home run with a good hitter way more often because that launch angle was higher. We do know that last year the exit velos had problems as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I don't think there was a major change other than the home runs per 9, which has been eliminated from online play. If you forget about the first half of this year, I think right now the state of the game and the state of the game last year, the exit velo issue was pretty much the same. I don't really think that they changed that too much in those stages of each year. I think the main difference actually was a change in the natural launch angle. That's why we couldn't use those weak contact guys, because they would always hit the ball up into the air when you squared it up. This year, that's not the case. So we just mentioned for a second those exit velocity issues, and wondering why on a good squared up pitch, the ball comes off the bat slower than the pitch coming in. And some people I've seen call this unrealistic, unscientific. That's not the case on the surface. Some people say if you swing a bat, why is it going slower than it came in? Well, if you don't swing hard enough, the ball will go slower than it came in. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on this, because we will get into why it is still a problem in a second. But I don't want people to say it's impossible for swinging a bat, making the ball go slower. If you don't swing hard enough, the ball will come off the bat slower than it came in. So the question is, why is the swing slowing down? Why are we not swinging hard enough when I square up a baseball? I think what they're trying to represent in real life is flailing at a pitch, or kind of adjusting in the zone to protect a pitch. And I see this happen a lot with good players who start with the PCI in the center of the plate and then adjust and make controlled movements to the baseball, end up squaring it up, but they're moving the PCI a little late. And I think there's a cutoff point in the hitting engine where if you're moving the PCI on contact within, let's say, like 50 milliseconds of the ball making contact with the bat, I think it slows down your swing. So kind of the opposite of that is that if you sit in one spot and you let the ball come to the PCI and you don't move it on contact very much, I think it rewards you more. And I've been talking about this forever on my Twitch. I talk about it pretty much every day on stream. I think the hitting engine rewards you for not moving the PCI on contact within, let's say, 50 milliseconds or something like that. That last bit of contact. So you can still move it from the center to the edge, but in that last chunk of time, if you're not moving it, it rewards you a little bit more. And that kind of explains also why people are so good at hitting pitches on the corners, because when you jam the PCI to it, your PCI is completely still. And you get better exit velo. There, we kind of inside out swung on that one, and we still got 97 off the bat. I know it's on veteran, so it's not a good explanation, but this also explains why when you don't get too much of the baseball, when you are squaring it up on a pitch that you got to a little bit early, meaning the PCI got to that spot a little bit early, that's why you get rewarded a little bit more. That's why people can also smash sinkers at the bottom of the zone when they don't move it too much and they're just sitting down there. So the question is, again, why is it slowing down? I think it's the engine trying to replicate, for instance, if you're looking inside for a pitch, if a hitter in the major leagues is looking inside for a pitch, and then the last second they try to reach out for something on the outside, their hips are already going in a certain direction, the power's going in a certain direction, and basically that last movement to catch the ball off the end of the bat or to lean across the plate actually makes them swing slower. That is a thing that happens in real life. So I think that's what they're trying to replicate. And if that is the case, I think that SDS needs to come out and tell us about that, because it's a very important part of trying to hit in this game. And I think that's why they call this zone hitting rather than like barrel or something like that, is that they want you to cover a part of the plate rather than just smack the PCI around the zone. And we'll get into another way that they can fix this if this is actually working as intended. But I think that's what they're really trying to say with the zone hitting. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I'm just saying that's the way I think it is. That's the pattern that I've been seeing all year long. All right, we're going to jump onto the pitching side real quick and talk about the next thing, which I kind of just mentioned here, and that there's so much damage done on corner pitches, especially when you throw a pitch like low and in. if they're not looking for a fastball, they can probably bloop it for a base hit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the home runs that you throw fastballs right here, or any pitch like basically right in this spot, low and in at the very bottom of the zone. And I think there's way too much damage done on those pitches. And even when people jam their PCIs to any of these corners, I think there's way too much damage done on those pitches. It's not that it's impossible for people to hit those, because you see all the time guys getting home runs on pitches way above the zone in real life. It happens. But the frequency that it happens in this game, the fact that this pitch is pretty much the worst pitch in the game, throwing a fastball there, a curveball there, a changeup, it doesn't matter. I think this is actually the worst pitch in the game, other than something pretty much down the pipe, because people can jam their PCIs to this so easily. I think that needs to be changed in some way. And the way that we just talked about the PCI and the fact that getting to a spot early or not moving the PCI on contact really rewards you, I think they will need to adjust that for more than just the fact that you miss squared up balls in the zone, even more than just the fact that you get weird exit velos on squared up pitches in the zone. And after watching a good amount of high level gameplay this year, the fact that the top players have a lot of their best swings on pitches that they jam the PCI towards pitches on the edge of the zone, the fact that there's so much damage done on the edge of the zone compared to something like a pitch right here, where someone jammed their PCI to the very bottom, so they ended up missing their pitch. I understand that that's a user input as well, and I don't think that players should more easily be rewarded for hitting this pitch. And I'm not saying that they should make it easier for someone to hit this pitch. I'm saying that when someone makes decent contact on this pitch, I would like it to be much more punished than pitches that someone throws at the bottom of the zone and they just jam their PCI to. I think the worst pitches should be punished more often on good swings, and and unless you're playing a really good player, a lot of people are not hitting a pitch right here as compared to an average hitter hitting that pitch down there. That's something that I don't necessarily have a solution to. I think that if SDS wants to continue to use zone hitting, I think they could have something like a starting point with your analog, and then for the area around it, maybe make the analog less sensitive. And then if you are trying to cover another part of the plate late in the pitch, so the pitch is already traveling and you're like, okay, this ball's gonna be low and in and I need to cover it, then you can make a quick move to that one, but maybe have the analog less sensitive to wherever you start the PCI before the pitch is thrown. That might also help fix the issue that we're having with the reduced exit velocities, and might help people understand why it makes sense that you're kind of changing your hips direction and things like that we talked about earlier. So that's a possible solution for reducing the amount of damage done on good pitches versus the ones that you miss over the middle of the plate. I'm also briefly going to mention that I think that sinkers need to be reevaluated, because it feels to me like sinkers up in the zone end up going faster than four-seamers. I don't know if you guys feel this the same way. It could be the fact that we see the break of the sinkers up in the zone and we think, okay, it's going to be a changeup or a curveball, and then it just stays straight. That is a possibility, but it does feel to me like the sinkers up in the zone have some kind of weird feedback where it makes your swing slow down or something like that, because it seems like we're late on high sinkers way too often. And I know they reduce the amount of break when the sinkers are high in the zone, which is good, but I think they need to reevaluate that again and kind of compare the number of frames it takes for a swing to come across a fastball versus a sinker. And finally, the last thing that I want them to change is to make the borderline pitches more realistic, in that if the ball is 50-50 on the corner, it can go either way. And most of the time, a strike is mostly determined based on if the ball is halfway over the edge of the zone, which is not really how it goes in real life. If any part of the ball catches the edge of the zone in real life, it is considered a strike. So I would like that to be implemented in the game next year. So right now it's about halfway through the ball is what's considered a strike, and then there is some randomness. Sometimes this is a strike and sometimes this is a ball, but for the most part it goes off the middle. I'd like it to be kind of like real life, where any part of the ball touching the zone ends up being a strike. And I think this actually will help reduce the amount of scoring in each game. We see a lot of people who, when the home runs per 9 were removed from the game, they were unhappy with how much scoring there was in the game and how unrealistic it was. We will also talk about a solution for that in a second, but I think this is the best way to actually make the game more realistic while also not really changing any other fundamentals. I think it would be a nice little change into the pitching side of the game, because especially if they don't fix the corner pitches, because it might take a lot of work and they might not have the resources to do it this year, but the fact that there's so much damage done on corner pitches, the fact that this pitch is not called a strike half the time, and then this pitch can be a home run very easily, is a very frustrating and not good game design. So at least one of those two things needs to be fixed, hopefully both. Okay, now I want to talk about some bigger picture things, and a lot of this stuff is, number one, probably not going to be able to be implemented in the next year or even two, but I know a lot of people like to have a conversation about these kinds of things, so I want to bring it up here as well. And the other part of this is that it might not be what SDS wants for the future of the game, because MLB The Show is considered to be the gold standard for a simulation baseball game. It's the only one on the market right now, and by doing some of the things that we're about to talk about, it might become less simulated. There's a chance that it becomes better. It might end up being a better representation of real life MLB, but the way that they'd have to do this is on trial and error basis, and they'd have to go through a lot of testing and kind of take a starting point and then change from there. Whereas right now, what they've done, it seems like to me, is they've added more and more and more logic every single year, and that makes a lot of randomness occur in the game, which we as online game players don't really want. So what I really want them to do is start from the approach of good input equals good output. And this is not something that we haven't heard a million times from people on Twitter and a lot of the great content creators and players of this game, is that good input should equal good output. The reason why that might not happen right now is because, number one, there is so much randomness and luck that goes on in real life baseball. We know that lineouts occur in real life baseball. We know that blue pits occur in real life baseball. We know that there's umpiring issues in baseball. And it seems like a lot of that stuff carries over into this game in order to make it more realistic. So in order to make good input equal good output without the game getting completely out of hand, you would have to make it a little bit harder. You may need to drop the overall PCI size, and you can't exactly make it one-to-one with the barrel. The reason being is because it would affect the swing timing, since it's not like a two-dimensional game. Since there is 3 dimensions, the ball's traveling across the plate, and you have different swing timings. You can't exactly make it one-to-one and have a great hitting experience. But what would be really interesting is if lineouts didn't exist and blue pits didn't exist. Now, like we've been saying, they both exist in real life. But I think it would be really interesting if they tried to go the approach of, if you have a good swing, if you square up a baseball, you will get a base hit. If you have a bad swing, you will not get on base. I think that would be extremely interesting. I don't know if they could do it, but the way I think about what I just said is that baseball has a lot of imperfections, right? Baseball has wind, baseball has umpires, baseball has blue pits and lineouts. Baseball has a lot of luck, and you can still put luck into the game. But we've already seen that SDS is willing to do small things like make perfect umpires, although it still needs to be adjusted, and they've completely removed wind from the game, at least in online play. So they are willing to make these small moves that are unrealistic. I'm wondering if they're willing to take it another step farther. And the reason why I say this is because we're capable of removing these imperfections. I would say if you could get rid of these things in real life baseball and still have it be natural, people would probably be okay with that. The fact that this is a video game and we have control over some imperfections, there is room to play around with this. In real life, a batting average on a line drive is somewhere between 677 and 690. So 2 out of 3 times when you hit a line drive, you're supposed to get a base hit. In this game, it's much, much less. And some of that has to do with really good outfielders. It has to do with a lot of power hitters that maybe don't get those soft line drives to drop for base hits. But I think it would be really interesting if they could get rid of that randomness. It might not look realistic off the bat, but if you have enough hit possibilities, you can actually make it look realistic. And then you just have to make the game a little bit harder. Like I said, you can make the PCIs a little bit smaller. And then if you square up a baseball, you could always get a certain type of line drive. At the end of the day, that would make the game much more enjoyable. And that's what's all about for online gameplay here. The better player, the person who does better, who plays better in that game, should win the game. And to me, the whole gist of this point is that, to me, that would make the game so much better. Even if it's a little bit more unrealistic, let's say you make online gameplay a little bit different from offline gameplay, That's okay. Make it a little bit more unrealistic, make it infinitely more rewarding. And the same goes for pitching as well. You make it a little bit harder, but you don't want hanging pitches on pitches that you get good, perfect inputs. And you should have some small amount of randomness, but a pitch should not go right down the middle, no matter what the guy's control is. The pitch should never go right down the middle with a perfectly timed input. You can make a difference based on ratings, of course. You still have to have ratings incorporated into the game. You can change the range of randomness. So if I throw a good input on a guy with pretty average or below average control like Rodon right here, if I throw a pitch here with a good input, there should be no more randomness than a pitch ending up in this quadrant if it's good, a perfect input. If it's a pitcher with really good control, like Kershaw or someone like that, the randomness should be about that big. This little square right here, that's as far as it should go. Well, a little bit off the plate as well. So no more than right there for a perfect input. But the problem is there's way too many breaking balls, especially where you get a perfect input, you're throwing it in the dirt and it ends up right here. Hits it for a home run. That should never, ever happen. Again, I'm not saying it needs to be 1-to-1, but the range for error needs to be really toned down because right now it's just completely random. And we were just talking about shrinking the PCI size in order to make the game a little bit harder so that you can make it more consistent. And you can do that in a small increment for what we have with zone hitting already. But if you really wanted, especially if we do go to multi-platform with PC gaming and mouse and keyboard, you could make a very small, very tiny PCI as if you're playing on Legend with a power swing and have 100% consistent results. Again, this is probably not going to happen for 2020. It might not be on SDS's radar ever. And like I said, also there is an issue with the timing and the fact that it's 3-dimensional. But I would not mind having a tiny PCI where you could swing and miss quite a bit, but every time you get the ball on the PCI, you're getting some kind of good hard contact. I think if they were to do that, it could be completely separate from zone, leave zone almost as is, fix up zone a little bit, but add a new hitting interface on top of zone. And I think that would really reward those very top players who line out the most, as opposed to myself, who would probably still need to use zone. You have less to worry about with both the casual players using zone and the really good players using the same thing. Now you have a little bit more of an option to give the hardcore players what they're looking for. Now I want to talk a little bit about ranked seasons and I guess the online gameplay in general, and especially talking about the different difficulties. So right now there are different difficulties for different levels. If you play someone that is below 700, or you yourself are below 700, you will play a game on All-Star. I think also the first spring training is also on Veteran, but mostly you're playing on All-Star. These two divisions right here are on Hall of Fame, and then above 900 is going to be on Legend. And personally, I don't mind it too much. I know that a lot of good players hate playing on All-Star, which I think is totally reasonable, and I'll talk about what we can do about that in a second. But I think the main issue between going through these three different difficulties is that there's a different pitch speed, and I also like to use different types of squads. I like to use high power and slower pitchers on All-Star and then switch it up a little bit for Hall of Fame. The problem is when you take that leap from starting at 650 going to 700 after winning a few games, you are still not guaranteed a game on Hall of Fame. So you could play an All-Star game back to Hall of Fame and win that game and then play another game on All-Star, and you're going back and forth until you reach about 775. So number one, if you're not going to change anything else about the matchmaker, which I think they will change these divisions a little bit, but the number one thing I think they should fix as a quick fix is right here. You see immediately when I get in there, I start at 721 to 856. That's a range of 135 points, which is very large. I think the number one thing they could do here is they could make the initial window much smaller. So if you are at 705 points, maybe start the matchmaker from 700 to 710, a 10-point range. It's going to be very hard to find a game in that range, but if you're willing to wait a little bit, you can guarantee yourself a game at a certain difficulty. Now, I think this is a band-aid fix. I think it's the minimum fix that they need to do for ranked seasons. And if they don't do this at the minimum, I will be very disappointed. But there are better fixes that they can do, so let's talk about those as well. So one option for what they could fix here is if you've ever played online rated mode, before you start up a game, after you take your pitcher, click all this stuff, right here in the online challenge settings, you get to decide what difficulty you want to play on. You can choose any, so there's an option of just picking whatever difficulty your opponent wants to play on in order to get a faster matchup. but you can choose what difficulty you want to play on. So I think there's room to add this in Diamond Dynasty. Obviously, they already have the matchmaker built. Like, they already have this stuff coded into the game. They would just have to somehow move it from one part of the game to the next. I don't know how easy or difficult that is, but it already exists somewhere in the game, so it's not unreasonable to expect them to be able to move it to Diamond Dynasty. The question is, why do they or do they not want to do it? So I think this would be great for the top level players, not only for them to enjoy the game a little bit more, but also people that watch them play on Twitch would be able to see a lot more high level gameplay at all times, because there is a little bit of, I don't want to play ranked because I don't want to play all-star at the beginning of the season, especially for the really good players. They know they can still win the games, but it's still a little bit of a chore to do. And it's like asking a major league player to go play in college for a little while. I think that's a little bit unreasonable. And there's no reason for them to be playing at a lower difficulty than what they're used to. And then the question becomes, like, if you've already got legend above 900, how do you make them earn the World Series reward that season, especially if it's tied to how quickly you can get to World Series? I think at that point you go ahead and disconnect the rewards from the progression in the divisions. There's probably a few different ways that they could do this, but you could have a checklist of, like, in order to get the top reward for that season, you need to have either this number of wins on All-Star, this number of wins on Hall of Fame, or this number of wins on Legend. Or you could have some kind of multiplier for wins on a certain difficulty. So let's say if you win a game on All-Star, you get 10 points. If you win a game on Legend, you get 30 points. And maybe you can adjust that based on how difficult your opponent was as well. But assuming that both opponents had to pick the same difficulty for them to match up, I think that would be a little bit easier than it might seem right now. I think there is a way for them to completely restructure this, because I don't necessarily mind someone who only plays on All-Star being able to obtain a World Series award. I do think they should have to work harder. And I know that it's available on the market as well. That's fine. But in terms of earning rewards, there is room for them to adjust it a little bit and still have the prestige of being a top player or a World Series player be a little bit different. You can hand out different nameplates. You could call it something different. So you could say that someone who plays games on Hall of Fame to get to that World Series award is considered a World Series player. You could say that the people that play on All-Star to get that reward don't get, like, the nameplate, or they don't get to be listed in a certain, like, standings or something like that. Their lifetime standings could take a hit in some way. There are ways to balance it while also giving people an opportunity to play on the difficulty that they want to play. So I do think that there are many options. There are probably way more options than what I just mentioned here. Again, changing the matchmaker is the minimum, and then going ahead and restructuring the division some way and making sure that people can play on the difficulty that they want to play. Those are all possibilities, and there's probably more than that. I've also seen people go in another direction and say that there should be a universal pitch speed, meaning when you go from All-Star to Hall of Fame to Legend, that there should just be one pitch speed. And then the difference between the difficulties would be either like timing windows or the PCI sizes. There still would be differences, but the pitch speeds would be the same. So there's a few things I could say about that. Number one, if you do what I just said, in that you let people choose what difficulty they're going to play on, you don't really have a need for a universal pitch speed because you're not really bouncing between one or the other. And that's the most annoying part, is having to play one game on one speed and going to another on another speed. If you let people choose their difficulty, you never have to deal with that. Number two, I think it's almost impossible for most people to expect them to play on Hall of Fame pitch speeds, because I think that's what it would default to. I think SDS, by doing a lot of events on Hall of Fame this year, wanted to test how much the casual player would want to play on Hall of Fame. And I think they have a lot of data that they could go based off of. So I can't say off the top of my head whether or not more or fewer people played a certain event because it was on Hall of Fame. I think SDS will have that information and can make a decision on that though. For instance, I wouldn't mind BR being played on Hall of Fame. I wouldn't mind the average game where you can't really choose your difficulty to be played on Hall of Fame pitch speeds. However, I think for a large portion of people, it is a little bit tough to expect them to play at that level. And I think it could be a big turnoff for what ends up being the majority of players. The main argument that I hear in favor of universal pitch speeds and why it's the logical option is because when you play other games, when you go and rank up into new rankings, The game doesn't change. If you're playing a shooter, the game doesn't change. It's just the strength of the opponents changes. And I totally understand what they're saying there. And it's true for most games, but I think baseball is different. I think even in real life, when you go from one level to the next, when you go from high school to college to the minor leagues to the major leagues, there is a pitch speed difference on average. And to expect a high school player to play against people in the major leagues and get hits, I think does not make sense. I think asking a major league player to go play against high school ball players does not make sense either. So while for a shooter, it makes sense because it's always consistent, we're also going based off of, again, a simulation baseball experience, and there are different levels to who is capable of what. Now, if you tell me that someone who plays on all-star difficulty should never be allowed to earn a World Series reward, I'm okay with that. I think that's reasonable. Again, I gave an option for where that could be possible in ranked seasons, but if SDS came out and said, okay, we're going to give you 3 separate difficulties and you can choose which one you want to play on, but we're not giving you a World Series reward if you do the checklist for an all-star mode, but we're not going to give you the World Series reward if you play only on all-star, I'm okay with that. I think that's fair. That's like saying if you're a minor league player and you win the championship, we're not giving you the same kind of bonus check that a major league player would make if they won the World Series. But at the same time, both of those players are playing legitimate games and playing at their level at that moment. So I think there is a place for different pitch speeds at different levels. All right, guys, that was a long-winded, rambling video, and those are generally my thoughts on what I think SDS can change for the future games. I don't expect them to do most of these changes for 2020, even if that is something that they do have on their mind. I know we talked a lot about the gameplay at the beginning. A lot of that stuff might not be SDS's approach or what they'd want to do ever, but I think it's a good conversation to have because I know a lot of people talk about like one-to-one inputs, having good input, good output, and I'm not necessarily sure that everyone has an opinion on how that could happen. Hopefully by doing this video, it gives you guys a jump start on the ideas that could make the game better. And if we could get any small portion of those to happen in MLB 20 or something that we see in the beta in the upcoming weeks, I think that would be really, really cool. I think the stuff that we talked about at the end there with the matchmaker is very, very important. I think it's almost necessary to have at least a couple of those things implemented into next year. Because in my opinion, ranked seasons is the most important part of online gameplay. And it's something that I had always binged in previous years, as you can see on the screen here. I have played about 500 games this year, but I do think that if the game was better, I would have played many, many more. And I know people who have quit the game as early as May because of the state of the gameplay, and a lot of it has to do with matchmaking too. Even if the gameplay wasn't significantly improved, improving the matchmaking could make the game a lot more enjoyable. And I think it's the most realistic option for the short term as well. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of conversation on these topics if it's something that relates to what you guys believe in terms of making the game better. I know everybody has opinions on something in this video, so let me know down below in the comments. Again, these are my thoughts based on the patterns that I've seen throughout the year. I tried to address some of the conversations that I've seen throughout the year as well from other people, but I also wanted to offer some solutions because I don't want to just complain about things. That's not how I do things. If you guys have watched my streams, you know that I don't just complain to complain. We usually have some kind of conversation going on about a flaw of the game and things like that. So what I'd really, really like for this video to do is to create that next level of the conversation to keep us all on the same page and to make the game better for the future years. So again, if you like this video, make sure you drop a like, definitely drop a comment. I stream every day on Twitch at 4 p.m. Central Time. I stream every weekday on Twitch. Hit me up on Twitter or Discord to stay connected with me, and I will see you guys soon.